The golden hour usually signaled tea time for Victoria Sterling, but today the setting sun felt like a countdown to her demise. Victoria, a billionaire philanthropist known for her influence in the tech industry, found herself in a nightmare far removed from the marble floors of her estate. She had been abducted during her morning jog by a group of professionals who had clearly done their homework. They didn't want a ransom that would leave a paper trail. They wanted her silence after she stumbled upon their illegal land clearing operation. They had dragged her deep into the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the high Sierras, far from any hiking trails or cell service. To ensure she wouldn't survive the night, they tied her to a gnarled, ancient pine tree located at the base of a steep ravine. Her wrists were bound with heavy-duty zip ties that bit into her skin with every movement, and a thick, professional-grade fabric hood had been cinched over her head, plunging her into a terrifying, suffocating darkness. The hood was tight, making every breath a labored struggle against the heavy material. For hours, Victoria fought. She kicked at the dry earth, trying to gain enough leverage to snap the ties or slide the hood against the rough bark of the tree to tear it open. But her captors had been meticulous. She was dehydrated, her strength was flagging, and the mountain air was beginning to take on a lethal chill. She slumped against the trunk, her ribs aching with every shallow breath. In the silence of the wilderness, she could hear the distant rush of the wind through the canyons, a sound that underscored her total isolation. She was a woman who could move markets with a single tweet, yet here she was, anonymous and dying under a black shroud. Just as hope began to evaporate, a small rhythmic sound broke through the wind, the frantic scratching of paws and a high-pitched, insistent whimper. It was Barnaby, her 6-month-old golden retriever puppy. Somehow, the small dog had escaped the van during the struggle and had spent the day tracking her mistress through miles of scrub and rock. Barnaby didn't understand the complexities of kidnapping or corporate greed. All he knew was that his human was in pain and trapped behind a wall of black fabric. Barnaby lunged at the hood, his small teeth snagging the reinforced hem. He pulled with all his might, his growls vibrating through Victoria's chest as she felt her head being jerked forward. He licked the small amount of skin visible at her neck, his tongue warm and wet against her cold, sweat-slicked skin. He circled her, barking at the black beast that seemed to be swallowing her head, his tail tucked between his legs in fear, yet he refused to leave her side. Victoria tried to speak, to tell him to run, but the gag beneath the hood turned her warning into a muffled groan. Barnaby stopped his tugging and let out a long, mournful howl that echoed off the ravine walls. He looked up at the steep slope leading toward the distant mountain road. He realized his small teeth wouldn't be enough to free her. With one last, lingering lick to her hand, the puppy turned away. He began the grueling ascent out of the ravine, his small paws sliding on the loose shale. He was exhausted and thirsty, but the image of his mistress slumped against the tree drove him forward. He reached the top of the ridge and saw the long, winding asphalt of the mountain pass in the distance, the only place where the giants in their metal carriages traveled. Barnaby began to run, a small gold speck moving against the vast gray landscape, carrying the weight of a billionaire's life on his furry shoulders. Barnaby reached the edge of the asphalt just as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the mountain pass. His small frame was covered in dust and burrs, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop. He knew the road was dangerous, yet it was the only place where the help his mistress needed could be found. For what felt like an eternity, the road remained silent. Then, the low hum of an engine vibrated through the ground. A white SUV with the distinct markings of the sheriff's department rounded a distant bend, its headlights cutting through the growing gloom. Inside was Deputy Miller, a man who had spent 10 years patrolling these lonely stretches of highway and thought he had seen everything. He was heading back to the station after a long shift, looking forward to a hot meal and sleep. Suddenly, his headlights caught a flash of movement. He slammed on his brakes, the tires of the heavy vehicle screeching and sending up a cloud of blue smoke as the SUV skidded to a halt just feet away from a tiny golden retriever puppy standing dead center in the lane. Miller sat in the cabin for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stepped out, prepared to scold a reckless hiker for letting their dog roam, but the silence of the mountain was broken by a sound that chilled him. The puppy wasn't barking in play, he was screaming. Barnaby let out a series of high-pitched, desperate yaps, his entire body trembling as he sat back on his haunches and lifted his front paws in a pleading gesture. "Hey there, little guy, where's your person?" Barnaby didn't move for the water. Instead, he locked eyes with the officer, tears welling in his large, dark eyes. He let out a soft, mournful whine and then bolted toward the steep embankment, stopping at the edge to look back and ensure the deputy was watching. Miller hesitated. Every instinct told him this was a wild goose chase, but the dog's behavior was too intentional to ignore. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and a multi-tool from his belt, clicking his radio to alert dispatch that he was investigating a possible emergency off-road. The descent was brutal. Barnaby led the way with a sure-footedness Miller struggled to match, the puppy frequently pausing to bark and urge the man forward through the thick brush and loose rock. As they neared the base of the massive pine tree, Miller's flashlight beam swept across the base. His breath hitched. He saw the slumped figure of a woman, her expensive athletic gear tattered and caked in mud. The sight of the black hood cinched tightly around her neck made his blood run cold. He realized immediately that this wasn't an accident. It was a slow-motion execution. "Dispatch, I have a code 3. I found a female victim, bound and hooded at the base of the ridge. Send medical and backup to my GPS coordinates now," Miller shouted into his shoulder mic as he crashed through the final few yards of scrub. He knelt beside the woman, who was barely conscious, her breath a faint, wet rattle beneath the heavy fabric. Barnaby was already there, licking her bound hands, his tail giving a single hopeful wag at the sight of the man in uniform. Miller took out his serrated multi-tool. He had to be careful. The hood was cinched so tight that one wrong move could nick her carotid artery. He felt the woman flinch as he touched the fabric, a muffled, terrified sound escaping her throat. "It's okay, Victoria. I'm Deputy Miller. I'm gonna get you out of this," he whispered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. He slid the blade under the heavy hem of the hood and began to saw through the reinforced material. With a final sharp tug, the black shroud fell away, revealing the pale, tear-streaked face of the world's most famous billionaire. As the hood fell away, Victoria's eyes squinted against the harsh glare of Miller's flashlight, her pupils dilating as she took her first breath of unfiltered mountain air. She let out a broken sob of relief, her body trembling so violently that Miller had to hold her shoulders to keep her from collapsing. Barnaby was instantly in her lap, his small tongue darting out to lick away the salt of her tears, his tail thumping against the dry earth in a rhythmic celebration of her survival. Miller worked quickly to slice through the heavy zip ties on her wrists and ankles. Once free, Victoria reached out with shaky hands, burying her face in Barnaby's dusty fur. The puppy, usually a whirlwind of energy, stayed perfectly still, leaning his weight into her as if trying to transfer his own strength. Miller handed her his water bottle, and she drank with a desperation that mirrored the puppy's earlier thirst. The silence of the ravine was soon shattered by the approaching thrum of a life flight helicopter and the wail of sirens echoing from the pass above. Miller helped Victoria to her feet, but her legs, cramped and weakened from hours of being bound, gave way. Without a word, the deputy lifted the billionaire into his arms, carrying her toward the clearing where the medics were descending. Barnaby trotted faithfully at his heels, never letting his mistress out of his sight. At the hospital, the scene was a whirlwind of activity. Victoria was whisked into a private wing, but she refused to be separated from the dog who had saved her. In an unprecedented move, the hospital administration allowed Barnaby to stay by her bedside. While the world's media gathered outside, clamoring for a statement from the found heiress, Victoria spent her first night of freedom in quiet reflection, her hand resting on the sleeping puppy's head. 2 months later, the rugged ravine and the Black Hood felt like a lifetime ago. The men who had abducted Victoria were behind bars, caught thanks to the dashcam footage from Miller's SUV and the evidence found at the site Barnaby had led him to. Victoria returned to her estate, but the experience had fundamentally shifted her perspective. She stepped out onto her sprawling back lawn, which had been converted into a state-of-the-art training and play facility for rescue animals. She wasn't alone. She was joined by Deputy Miller, who had become a close friend and a board member of her new foundation. "He looks happy," Miller noted, watching a sleek, healthy Barnaby sprint across the grass, chasing a tennis ball with the same intensity he had used to chase down help on the highway. Barnaby wasn't playing alone. Beside him ran a litter of golden puppies Victoria had rescued from a high-kill shelter, giving them the same second chance at life that Barnaby had given her. "He's more than happy," Victoria replied, her voice filled with a warmth that her business rivals wouldn't recognize. "He's home." The story ended not with a press conference or a stock market surge, but with a simple scene of a woman and her dog walking together into the sunset. The billionaire who once had everything realized she had truly possessed nothing until a small puppy taught her the value of loyalty, courage, and a life saved.